Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, March 1st, 2007. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. Well, this week we talked to Chris Colby of Brew Your Own magazine about malting your own grain at home. For those of us who think making beer at home just isn't enough, and for those who think all grain brewing is taking the easy way out. Seriously, if you don't decide to malt your own grain after this interview, you will get a better appreciation for folks like Bob Hansen at Brew Malt and Ingredients, who do this thing for a living. I'm getting a bunch of good comments about brewing software that you're using or have used. I appreciate those of you who have taken the time to write in. In addition to commercial examples, I've gotten some comments about free software solutions out there, too. It's going to be a while before I put together a show on the topic, so you've got time. I've got a lot of good stuff in the can lined up to go, interview-wise, so if you haven't written in your input on brewing software, please do. I want to get a good sample of opinion from everybody out there about the different programs and make sure we kind of get the thing covered. You can send your comments to james@basicbrewing.com or just use the contact form at basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from, and please make sure and check the spelling of your email address to make sure that I can reply to thank you. It may take me a little while, but I'll get around to it. Gianluca from Los Angeles writes to say he watches our video podcast on a 42-inch plasma television. Sheesh. I can't imagine. I personally like to see myself on as small a screen as possible. Anyway, Gianluca has received some bad news, actually. He says, unfortunately, I just learned that I'm diabetic. I'm taking the news in strides and will adjust to my new routine well enough. My main concern is really about not being able to enjoy my beer, or anyone else's, for that matter. I wanted to suggest to you the topic of a future podcast. Are there any diabetics out there who have found a way to continue homebrewing and drinking their brew? I drink in moderation, and heavy drinking is not what I'm talking about. It's more a question of having 1 or 2 beers a few times in the week. Maybe the topic could expand in creating a recipe from scratch that would yield a drier beer with low sugar content. Well, we've done a show on gluten-free beer for those who have celiac disease, so I'm sure we could dig up some information to help diabetics. Can you help? If you're a diabetic and have found a way to manage your diabetes responsibly and have a home brew every now and then, or if you found recipes that are better suited for people with the condition, let me know. And of course, if you're diabetic, you need to ask your doctor for advice on the topic first and foremost, and not just me. But hopefully we can get some information, some tips out there of how people are dealing with the situation themselves. So best of luck to you, Gianluca, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly. Bill from Naperville, Illinois writes in with a tip for those in colder climates. Bill says, I found the best way to hit a desired temperature for ale when it's too cold is to use an aquarium heater. To use it, set your carboy in a plastic container. Insulation is optional. Fill the container with water and set an aquarium heater in the water. The good ones are reliable, long-lasting, and will allow you to easily maintain your chosen temperature to within plus or minus 1 degree Fahrenheit and are easily adjustable from about 60 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. A 50-watt heater should do for most folks. A 100-watt heater would have the heating capacity to enable it to keep 20 gallons, say, to each 5 gallons of wort plus 10 to 20 gallons of water around the 2 carboys, anywhere from room temperature to almost 30 degrees higher than the average temperature of the room. So if you want to do an 80-degree fermentation in a 50-degree room, this would not be a problem with a 100-watt heater. Bill says I would not suggest a bigger heater than that. If you need more heat, go with insulation at that point. Bill says cheap ones go for about $10, good ones $20 to $30. Some heaters hang on the side, some are submersible. He says submersibles are nice because you don't have to worry about keeping the top dry. Either type will do a fine job. Well, thanks, Bill. It seems I've actually received a tip from someone who has put a submersible aquarium heater in the wort itself. Now, Bill's method sounds a bit safer from a sanitization standpoint and a bit easier. You wouldn't have to worry about cleaning the aquarium heater after you took it out of your wort. So you can just set your sealed fermenter in the water and put the heater in the water next to it. Sounds like a great idea and cheap too, which appeals to me. Chad from Edmonton, Canada writes, I thought you might be interested in a short episode of a video podcast I came across. It's short, 5 minutes. In it, a guy demonstrates how to brew kombucha, a strange fermented Russian tea drink involving a mother, which is this stuff that floats on top of the tea. Chad says the guy is pretty sloppy, sanitation be damned, and I can hardly believe he drinks the stuff. Sounds yummy. The title of the podcast is Make Magazine. You can find it on iTunes, and the title of the episode is How to Big Batch Kombucha. I think I'm pronouncing that properly. I'm pronouncing it similar to what the guy on the podcast did, so I appreciate that, Chad. This is the second email I've received recently on this fermented tea stuff, so it was interesting to see how at least one guy makes it. Now, Chad is right. The guy who brews the tea doesn't pay much attention to sanitization, and the mother is this gelatinous pad that floats on top of the tea that you reuse from one batch to another. In the end, it looks, the jars of tea look kind of like some of the jars you've seen in biology class with, specimens of one sort floating in it. But interesting process nevertheless. Here's a basic question from Andy in Raleigh, North Carolina. And, I like the basic ones. I like the easy ones. I have a question about a little beer terminology. Many times during the program, I hear you refer to a beer's body or mouthfeel. I don't think I fully understand to what this is referring. Well, Andy, last week I tackled the term session beer, so let me take a quick whack at this one. Mouthfeel is essentially the way the beer feels in your mouth. To explain, let's take a couple of extreme examples. Maple syrup has a heavy mouthfeel and a lot of body, while water, not so much. Stone's Arrogant Bastard, heavy mouthfeel, a lot of body. Coors Light, not so much. It's not necessarily bad to lack mouthfeel or body. It's all according to the style. In some styles, it's appropriate to have a light mouthfeel. So I hope that helps. And I don't, we don't. Again, it's no, there's no shame in asking a question if you're new to the hobby, or if you hear a term that we bat around here frequently and don't really explain it. Take it for granted that everybody knows what it is. Call us on it. Let us know so we can explain. I'm sure other people out there are appreciating it too. Incidentally, Alexander from Montreal sent me a link to a posting on Homebrew Digest discussing session beers. And instead of excerpting parts to read to you here, I'll just post a link to it in the description of this episode on basicbrewingradio.com. I appreciate Alexander sending that. Now let's get to the interview with Chris Colby on malting your own grain. For those of you who think all grain brewing doesn't go far back enough into the brewing process, there's an article in the current issue of BYO, Brew Your Own magazine, that will show you how to go all the way back to the seed. Well, Chris Colby, welcome again to Basic Brewing Radio.
Thanks.
Now today is, we get requests for basic shows, and we get requests for more adventurous, advanced shows. And I would say that today's topic, malting your own grain, is definitely an advanced topic, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, this is something that if you're brewing your first beer, or you're still, working out the kinks of making 5 gallons of, extract beer, this might not be your next step.
I did some research on the web. It's probably more than a year ago, and stumbled upon a website of somebody malting their own grain, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that someone would go to the trouble. But you've got an article in this month's BYO by John. Is it Sticka or Stika?
That's a good question. I always pronounce it John Stika, but I've only seen it in print. I'll have to ask him.
In today's day and age where we correspond by email, we have no clue how to say things.
Yeah, no, it's weird. I'd never thought about that, but I actually have no idea how to pronounce it.
Well, John does a good article, or does a good job in the article of taking us through the steps. So, Chris, why don't you take us? Well, first of all, I guess we should answer the question of why someone would want to go through all the trouble and man-hours of malting your own grain.
Well, malting your own grain is a process where you take raw grain, seed, and make it into something that's usable in brewing, or at least usable as the base ingredient in brewing. You can use small amounts of raw grain as an adjunct, but if you want to make beer, you need malted, grain, either malted barley, malted wheat, or malts of some other kind of grains. And why you'd want to do it at home, I guess, would be, sort of for the same reason as why do you want to brew your own beer at home? I think it would be interesting. I've actually never done this yet, although I'm growing barley this year. I bought 25 pounds of barley seed, and I'm going to try to get a little plot out on my father-in-law's ranch, see if I can't get a little bit of a barley crop and give it a try.
Wow.
And, I'm just doing it for the fun of it, I just think it'll be interesting. I've been growing hops, too, for the last 3 years, and I would just like to brew a beer, quote-unquote, from scratch. That, I've grown the ingredients, harvested them, processed them, malting the barley, kilning the hops, and I just think it'll be interesting.
And are you going to dig your own well and get your own water, or
no? And I'm going to use, commercial yeast rather than trying to harvest that from nature and select it for hundreds of thousands of generations to become a good brewing yeast.
Then you're cheating.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, what goes on inside the husk or the kernel? Why do you have to use a malted barley in brewing?
Well, malting does a number of things. The most important couple are when you malt the barley, you germinate it and it begins to grow, and it develops enzymes that are used then in the mashing stage, specifically the amylase enzymes that degrade the starch into simple sugars and sort of shorter chain carbohydrates. And the second thing that happens in malting is that after the grain is germinated and sprouted and all the enzymes are activated, the malt is kilned. It's like heated. Then this dries it out, but it also like lightly toasts the outside of it, and this develops the malt flavors. Like if you're talking about a pale malt or a pilsner malt, it's killed at a relatively low temperature. If you're talking about darker malts like Vienna or Munich, slightly higher temperatures. And then, of course, if you're talking about specialty malts, like a crystal malt or a chocolate malt or a black patent or whatever, those are progressively, much higher temperatures. So malting develops the enzymes that you're going to use in the mash, and it also develops the flavors from heating the grain, heating the husk, and those are sort of the primary two, the big two things that malting accomplishes.
So first of all, where would you get your barley seed, and what would you ask for?
Well, you have to look around a little bit to find barley seed. I get a lot of like gardening catalogs in the mail, and I sort of thought, well, I'll just turn to the section on, barley or wheat, and but a lot of places don't sell it because it's, most people don't, who garden don't grow grains. But there are a few. There are a couple that we mentioned in the magazine, Johnny's Seeds, and a place called Howe Seeds. They both sell a variety of barley called Robust, which is a 6-row type. And also, if you live in a county where there's any agriculture, you can just sort of call the county agent and ask him, what sources are for the seed. Sometimes, obviously, to people selling barley seed are looking to sell it to someone who's going to plant acre upon acre upon acre. And if you want a couple pounds, they might not be so happy to deal with you. But you can always try.
You might be able to get the spillage out of a bag somewhere and get what you need.
Yeah, you don't need that much.
So what's the first step? I mean, you've got your seed, I guess, is the very first step. But then once you get it home, what do you do with it? Yeah,
well, you've got basically, as an overview in malting, you've got 3 or 4 different steps depending on how you count them. You've got a steeping stage where you steep the malt or the grain that's to be malted in water, and this activates the grain, and it'll start to germinate. Then you've got a second stage where you remove it from the water and allow it to germinate and to continue its growth. And in the final stage, or you can break it up into 2 stages because there's some differences. There's drying and kilning, where you've steeped the grain in the first step. It's taken on a lot of water. It's germinated out of the water, but you still spray it and keep it moist during that stage. And now you've got the grain has started to grow, the enzymes are activated, and you want to stop it at that process. So you dry the malt down to about 10% moisture, and then after that comes the kilning stage, where you bump up the temperature and develop the malt flavors in your malt. And so you can think of drying and kilning as 2 different stages, although they're sometimes explained as 1 stage because they're kind of a continuum.
And in the book, in the magazine, you've got a picture of barley being steeped in a bucket with what looks like an aquarium pump supplying some aeration in there. I guess you don't want to drown it. I mean, these are living seeds. You don't want to drown them. You don't want to steep them too much.
Yeah, in the steep, you're exactly right. You've got living organisms, and you want to steep them in water so they take on water. And specifically, like for barley, you want them to take around between 42 and 46% moisture. So it's a fairly narrow band there. And so you start to steep them, but you need not to drown them. And there's a couple ways that you do this. One is that you can aerate the water. Apparently, one ancient technique of malting involved people would take a loose woven bag full of barley and stick it in a running stream, so it would get the water it would get would be continuously aerated. Anyway, you probably don't have access to a lot of clean running streams these days. So a modern way to do that is to aerate the water as you go. A second way to keep up the aeration is that the steeping step is actually divided into sort of 2 different alternating steps, which are called steeps and air rests. So what you do in the steep is the grain is actually underwater, and you either do or don't aerate it with an aquarium pump. And the second, the air rest stage, you drain out the water and let it sit for a little while before the next steep. Like you can do it. I'm trying to think in the article we give sort of the old English way to do it, which I think is an 8-hour steep followed by trying to look through and just figure out the times. But anyway, it's an 8-hour steep followed by a fairly long air rest, and then another 8-hour steep or something like that.
So it's kind of like waterboarding for grain.
Yeah, it is. You put them under water, you pull them up, you put them under. Modern maltsters tend to have shorter steeps and longer air rests, and just more of them. They sort of go through a more, in out cycle. Whereas sort of the older traditional ways were, probably because they were doing it all by hand. There's fewer. It's usually two steeps followed by separated by a big air rest in the middle.
So how do you know if you've steeped enough?
Well, you need the grain to take on a certain amount of moisture. Like I said, between 42 and 46. Usually on the lower end of that range, if you're making a light malt like a Pilsner malt or a pale ale or a pale malt, and at the higher end of that range, if you're making like a Munich malt or a pale ale malt or something that's darker, a darker base grain. And the way you do it is you've got they're expensive meters that can do it for you, but the real way that you're going to have to do it at home is you're just going to measure the weight of the grain when you start, and you're going to know that the barley is stored in silos at around 12 or 13% moisture. So you're going to know that the weight that you get when you start is the weight of the barley plus 12 to 13% moisture, and then you're just going to have to, at various stages, or especially when you get close to where you think it should be done, just weigh the barley and then see what the weight is. And in the magazine, we give the like on a per pound basis how much you would expect the weight to change, and when you're in the right area. Yeah,
that's handy for us who are mathematically challenged at times.
Yeah, and you can realistically you could skip that stage if you're trying it. You're at home. You could go by the time recommendations on the steep and the air rest and the steep, and you're probably close enough.
Yeah,
one interesting thing when we wrote this article, it's fairly technical. It's there's a lot of different stages, and you're supposed to be hit this temperature and this, but it's like there's a whole nother layer of technical stuff that we didn't get into that maltsters do. And the first time I read up on malting, and this is like the third or fourth time now I've done it and sort of thought about it, every time I read it I was kind of intimidated, because it's like, wow, they do, it's really, really, really highly technical. But the other thing I'm starting to learn from the multiple times that I've read about malting is they've done it for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
And these days it's incredibly technical, because they're not only they want to produce malt, but they want to do it with the minimum amount of energy investment, although it is a very energy intense process. They want to lose the least amount of material from the inside of the barley when they do this. They want to minimize what they call their malting losses, because when you germinate the grain and it starts to grow, it's using up energy reserves, it's using up starch from the middle, and they try to minimize that. And they have all these economic reasons that they're trying to do, and they obviously have very big technically advanced plants to do it. But on the other hand, people have been doing it for centuries by just sticking a sack of grain and running water. And so you've got to if you're someone who, like me, who's like fairly techno nerdy, you might look at this and go, oh my God, I can never do anything. But then when you realize that if you're at our scale, you're not really going to be worried, I don't think, about your malting losses.
Yeah, we're at malting 4 pounds at a time. You're not exactly competing with Brew Malt and Ingredients Company.
No, yeah, you're not going to be. It's not going to be that big a deal. And if you can't, hit some of these temperatures exactly, and then some of the, get the exact right moisture content, it's not, a fail or succeed kind of, switch. It's just, it'll be slightly better or slightly worse malt.
So after we've steeped, it's time to germinate.
Right. And germination is sort of the stage where you do, at home at least, you do the least, but it's where, a lot of the changes start occurring biologically for the barley. Once it's taken on, a requisite amount of water, it starts to grow. And basically in germination, you just you've pulled the grain out of the liquid and just stacked it up a couple inches high. You could do it depending on your scale on a cookie sheet, or was it you telling me about some guy who malted his own and spread it all over his kitchen floor?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's if you have a wife or girlfriend, that might not be an option. But if you have some clean floor space somewhere and you were actually malting any reasonable amount of barley, you might want to try that. I think most home brewers will probably be, if they do malt it, will probably be malting on the scale that a couple big cookie sheets will hold it all, because you still got to dry it and kiln it all. Basically germination. You lay the malt out, monitor the temperature, and you just keep a spray bottle of water handy and keep the grain just moist enough that you're sort of replacing any water that's using up during the process. And basically it'll start to grow. You'll see the roots will come out at one end, the little rootlets, and eventually what you'll see is the acrospire will poke out of the other end. What happens is it comes out the same under the husk. It sort of comes out at the same end as the rootlets, but it grows up the side of the husk and then eventually pokes out. And you can take like a razor blade and take like a sample every day of a couple and cut them open and try to see this. And basically the measure that you'll use at home for when malting is done is that the shoot or the acrospire is going to be poked out of the grain and be extended a little ways, and depending on how modified you want your malt, this will be different. If you're making a very light grain, you might want to go with a little less shoot growth. If you're making a slightly darker one, a little bit more.
And this is where the term highly modified or under modified malt comes from.
Right. Modification is because another thing going on with the malt at this point, and what they're really referring to when they refer to modification is when you take raw barley seed. If you were to take a couple grains and chew it in your mouth, it'd be very hard, very steely. In comparison, if you took a couple grains of malt and chew it, it's very it's much softer. And what happens in modification is while the plant starts growing, the roots are starting to develop, the shoot is going. A lot of the harder substances, the gums and other things, are starting to be broken down by the enzymes released by the barley. So a big stage in making beer, and one that we don't really deal with ever at home, is the maltster breaking the hard substances down in the grain enough that they can be milled successfully. Because if you put just like barley seed in your grain mill, and if you were hand cranking it, you'd have a really rough go at that. So modification is the breakdown of a lot of the hard substances in the grain, the development of the enzymes, and you can sort of guess or guesstimate or check its progress by the growth of the shoot.
And when you get to the point where you need to be, it's time to stop that poor little seedling from its yearning to be free and,
right.
and to dry it out.
Yeah, you get to a point where any further growth, all it's going to do is be using up starch in the middle of your barley seed, and you want that to turn into extract, the carbohydrates, fermentable and non-fermentable in the wort. So what you do is you dry it, and in drying you have a couple goals. The first is removing water, but a goal along with that is that you're going to want to preserve the enzymes in the malt when you do so, because you're going to crush the malt, put it in the mash later, and you're going to need the enzymes you develop to still be active. So when you dry, you dry it at a relatively low temperature to start off with, and it's usually less than 125 degrees Fahrenheit, and sometimes quite a bit less. And what you do is you dry it, and you weigh the grain every once in a while, and you want it to be down to about 10% moisture. So it's gonna weigh eventually in the drying stage. It's gonna weigh like slightly less per pound than you got it at, because you probably got the seed at 12 or 13% moisture. So once you get down to about 10 or 13 or around 10% moisture, the enzymes they're dry. There's no water around them, and they're much less sensitive. To heat at that point. So once you get the water dried, out from around them, then you can jack up the heat a little bit and get the sort of flavors you want in your malt and dry it down the last little bit, which you usually dry it down to like 6% or so moisture.
Now, is a food dehydrator, is it necessary, or are there other techniques to drying out the grain?
John does his in a food dehydrator, and those are really nice because, for a home scale, because in a commercial malting, they, the drying is done in special ovens where there's a lot of airflow. They move air through there, through the grain, and they actually, like I said before, there's some technical stuff that this article doesn't go into. They actually very carefully measure the temperature of the air coming in, the humidity, and then the temperature and humidity of the air coming off, and they have set targets for that. At home you're not going to be that fussy, but a nice thing about a food dehydrator is, it's first of all designed to dehydrate stuff, so you don't have to worry about building something on your own, but it mimics that. It pushes hot air through there that has air circulation, and it gets rid of the moisture. And also, a lot of the bigger ones, the temperatures, actually, you can turn it up and you can do the kilning later in them. So it's a nice thing to have. It's not absolutely critical. You can, I've heard all different kinds of methods people use, from putting all the barley in like a pillowcase and throwing it in the dryer. Some people have used that as a method. I've heard one person who hasn't done it yet, but he's going to try to. He's got a home smoker, and he's going to try to dry the grain in there. I think if you had, most ovens don't go that low, but if for some reason you had some sort of advanced gourmet oven that was able to go to really low temperatures, you could try it in there. Although you wouldn't have any airflow, you'd have to rig something up for that, or obviously for the home tinkerer, for someone who's really likes building stuff, you could build some sort of like at Malting. At Maltings they have it's essentially a room with a false bottom, and the grain is stacked on top of that, the malt now, and hot air is forced up through the bottom, comes out to the top of the grain, and then it's there's an airflow that whisks it away, and you could certainly with a little mesh and a heater and a couple fans, rig up a box to do maltings, if you were mechanically inclined. So yeah, you've got a few options. Food dehydrator is the one we recommend in the article, simply because we know it works. John's malted his own before and had it work. So
it's a tool that's designed for the task. Yeah,
it's designed for not specifically barley malting, but it's designed to dehydrate foods, and the way it does it is very similar to how you would do it in a malting plant.
So once you've got it dried out sufficiently to so that you're not worried about deactivating the enzymes so much, now you can kind of play, and you can design sort of your own malt.
Right. You can at that point you're in charge of roasting the malt, and you can set the temperature and time you do it. You might want to you can certainly make multiple types of malt from your dried grain at that point. If you wanted to put it all in a pan and toast a little bit, or start toasting it all until it gets to like a pale malt color, and then you could pull out, say, 3/4 of it and leave, the last quarter, and maybe bump the temperature up for a little while longer, and shoot for more of a, a highly kilned, a darker base malt. Or you could take some of it and, try to make a specialty malt. You could, really turn up the heat. A food dehydrator wouldn't go this high, but, certainly your oven would. And you could try to make, like a chocolate malt or, a roasted malt or something like that.
John also talks about making crystal malt as well.
Right. Crystal malt's a slightly different process in that you'd have to, if you had dried your malt already, you'd have to re-steep it and then like stew it, which is essentially heating the malt to like mashing temperatures, and letting it sort of internally convert everything, and then roasting it at higher temperatures.
So you're doing a mash inside the kernel essentially, and turning those starches into sugars.
Right, and I think in maltsters though they don't dry it and then re-steep it. I think they just, when they get to the stage of when it comes to drying it, they skip that stage and maybe add a little bit more water and stew it that way.
Yeah, it's you can go the whole 9 yards from taking raw seed and malting it and then roasting it and kilning it and you can make your own base malts. You can make your own specialty malts if you have the inclination. So if you follow the steps that the big maltsters use with the tools that you have at home, and you have enough energy, you can make your own stuff.
Yeah, I mean, a couple different applications of this would be if you grow any sort of grain in your garden that's not the standard, wheat or barley or whatever. Or another article we have in the issue is making beer for people who suffer from celiacs, making a gluten-free grain,
right,
or beer. And so, some people might want to malt, grains like sorghum or quinoa or, any of the grains that don't contain gluten. And basically, for every grain, the steps are basically similar, although, each grain has, there are better and worse, temperatures and times and whatever. And we, actually in John's article, we give a couple of the hints for malting sorghum, how that's different than barley. But, some people might have some, grain that they want to malt, either to make a gluten-free beer or just because they, like this grain and want to try it, a small amount of that in their beer. Or some people, I mean, like me, I'm just trying it sort of because, I have a garden every year that I grow. I thought, hey, it'd be fun to grow some barley. I already grow hops, and it'd just be fun to, give it a try.
Yeah, about a decade ago, some friends of ours who have a chicken farm tore down one of their chicken houses, and to kind of condition the soil where the chicken house was, they planted barley. And since I had just started home brewing, they said, hey, can you use this to make beer? And I talked to a couple of people, and the answer was basically no. But I wish that I'd known more back then about this process. It would have been fun to at least try it.
Yeah, although it is, like I said before, technical in some aspects, it really comes down to just steeping the grain in water for a little while, letting it sprout, and then the only real stage that you need anything, any piece of advanced equipment is when you dry it in a food dehydrator. And I think if you're going to try to if you're going to do this often, let's say you have a little patch of garden somewhere and you're going to try to malt barley every year, I think you probably, just like brewing, just doing it is going to make you better at it over time. I think the first time you do it, I wouldn't expect to have, really high quality, malt coming out of it. It's going to take a little bit of time to get your techniques down. And, we recommend in the article, if you're gonna make your own malt, you're probably gonna want to go through a decoction mash to use it. I mean, the decoction mashing was used in the past for a variety of reasons, but probably primarily to get the most out of the malts of the past that were likely under-modified and, which might not be your problem as a home maltster, but unevenly modified, which probably is going to be at your scale. You can. It would be fun to try. I think I'm going to try it. I know a few other people who are interested in it, and I think as homebrewers we're always looking for that next thing to do, or at least I am. Looking for something to try that is interesting and relevant to brewing. And I think for I don't have any illusions that like every home brewer in the world is going to run out and try this, but I think a few will. And I also just think that for people, even the people who don't do it, you can read the article and you can sort of appreciate the amount of effort that goes into making malt. Because like you hear a lot of times people talking about all grain brewing, and they say, I'm making my beer from scratch, and it's like, well,
not really.
If you're going to make fun of extract brewers for just opening up a can, you can sort of, if that was your sort of personality that you need to make fun of fellow brewers, you can sort of make fun of people for just opening up a sack of malt, because the process that made the malt itself is very complex, and just the added slight step of turning it into extract is complexity wise not that big a deal.
Well, great. This has been fun. Again, let us know when you do your own experiment, how it turns out, and maybe we can pass on some more tips at that point.
Yeah, I'll definitely let you know. My biggest hurdle here might be the climate. I don't know at all if barley grows well in Texas, but I'm going to find out.
It'll probably grow bigger.
Yeah, it'll probably grow really fast and then die in the heat. But I'll have something to do for the next couple of years. Try to see if I can get a decent crop, and then when I do, try to actually malt it.
Well, there you go. Well, Chris, I appreciate your time again.
It's always fun, James.
Well, thanks again to Chris Colby for taking time away from the Colby barley farm to talk to us. We wish him luck on his barley growing experiment, and I look forward to hearing how it goes. And I'm tempted to try it myself. You can read more about home malting in Brew Your Own magazine, and if you click on the BYO banner on basicbrewingradio.com, you can get a free issue. And if you decide to subscribe after that, you'll be helping to support this podcast. So thanks to everybody who has decided to do so already. Well, next week we'll talk to Ken Smith, whose face is on many six-packs of beer. Ken was the Boston Beer Company employee whose beer was chosen to be included in the Long Shot six-pack that's in stores across the country. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com, and please don't forget to tell us where you're from, and check your email address as well. And while you're on our site, you can check out our online shop, where you can find great pricing on our DVDs and a combo deal to save you even more. In Basic Brewing, Introduction to Extract Home Brewing, we walk you through the extract brewing process step by step from boiling to bottling. And in Basic Brewing, Stepping into All Grain, we take you through the all grain process, not exactly from seed, but, from malted grain, from milling that malted grain to collecting your wort. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com, and that list has grown recently, and we appreciate those new vendors. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order it online from us, and I'll pack it up myself. So thanks to everybody who's continued also to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are A World at Arms, A Global History of World War II, and The Cat Who Talked to Ghosts. Thanks again, everybody. And remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries about that. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping, and we appreciate your support. Won't cost you any extra. That's all until next week. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by our buddy in Austin, Kelly Dodson, who also did our logo. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time. So long.